Hey, Rahkim. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me today. Really excited to get into your story. I heard a bit about it during your TED Talk, and I wanted to just get some more conversation going about your experiences and what your perspective of finances and how you're helping people. So I want to start off by asking, what is your earliest money memory?
Yeah, I love this question. So my earliest money memory, I recently remembered, if that's said correctly. It was a birthday of mine, and my dad came to me and he asked me what I wanted. And I think I was getting ready to go into high school, so maybe middle school age. And I just said like I wanted a new outfit. Like I wanted a pair of jeans and a couple of shirts. And at the time, I lived in New York, and so it was this like really popular store called VIM. And I knew my dad was gonna probably like take me to Fordham Road in the Bronx. We were gonna go to VIM, we're gonna get the jeans, a couple of shirts, maybe some sneakers. But I remember that, or I recently remembered that because I realized that that moment I started training myself to accept and expect less financially. And when I say less, what I mean is like quality and experiences because I didn't want to be disappointed by asking for the things that I really wanted and then being told that I couldn't have it or that it was an unreasonable request based off of where my parents were financially. So I'm the oldest of my siblings. I've always been kind of like the responsible, reasonable, logical child. And I think I thought at the time I was doing my dad a favor by setting the bar relatively low in terms of what it is that I wanted. And the reason why I stumbled across this memory recently was because I started to dig into like what are some of the limiting beliefs that I have, and particularly around money. And what I realized was that I had convinced myself that I was very simple, that I wanted, the very basic of things as a defense mechanism for feeling that disappointment.
I can totally relate to that. Like for me, my earliest or early adulthood, childhood was about like that as well. I didn't want to bother my parents or guardians for much. And so I can completely agree. What were some of the things that you didn't want to ask for, but maybe felt that you needed or wanted?
Oh, I can't remember now. Probably a video game system. I think, so I was born in the 90s. So growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, of course, we saw the rise of social media and, the sophistication of the video game systems. I remember the earliest video game system that me and my brother had was the Sega Genesis, and it was a second-hand version. And so, eventually we ventured into the PlayStations and we got the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2. But it was always like you get the thing, but you don't get the accessory that comes with it, right? So like maybe you're sharing a controller, or maybe you can't afford the memory cards, or whatever the extra thing was, you didn't get. And so when I think about some of the things that maybe I wanted at that particular point in time as a kid, it probably was that. I don't remember ever being, drawn to labels per se. So I wasn't the kid who was asking for like, the True Religion jeans or, a pair of Jordan sneakers. But certainly, if those were things that were accessible to us, I think maybe we would have asked for them just because kids start to learn about status at that age. They start to learn about, well, what is cool and what's not cool and what makes you cool for having. And so where there's parts of that experience that I'm very grateful, in that I didn't become super obsessed or obsessive about labels. I think certainly there were some internal, I don't want to call them pain points, but stops as it relates to how I viewed money and how I viewed people who demonstrated their money through status.
Yeah. I agree what you say, with what you said about like that is the age where you start thinking about status and where you kind of are compared to your friends and things. Like, how did you feel when you realized what your status was, um, in your middle school experience or amongst your peers?
I think a sort of cognitive dissonance occurred where it was just kind of like, well, we don't have it, so I don't want it. And in that way, I became very proud of the fact that, we could have clothes or items that were just as good as. Certainly, we didn't get, I'm saying we, but I should really be saying me, did not get the level of attention for what it is that I was wearing that maybe some peers did. And I think as a kid, you kind of create these scenarios in your mind around, the athletic kids are more athletic because they have the Nike or they have the Adidas, right? And so I think certainly there were issues of self-esteem there that maybe I didn't recognize or pick up on in terms of athletic ability or even a desire to participate in athletics. When I think about that time period, I was a musician, so being able to have your own instrument or being able to afford classes or private classes so that you can continue to develop the skill or go away to camps, like all of those things were kind of out of reach. And so it was like, oh well, we don't have the money for that. So there wasn't like a frustration at that point. I don't remember at least there being any. But I think later on in life, when I look back and I'm like, man, like what would that have turned into as it relates to an opportunity if we had the money to invest in that?
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I guess that was your coping mechanism to like not even think about it and instead just do without. Do you feel, well, with that, do you remember of any situation where you maybe tried to get things that you wanted on your own? I've spoken to some people who like maybe thought about, oh, well, I'll get it on my own. And even myself, once I started making my own money in high school, I was like, oh, I like really appreciated that experience, and I since then have not stopped working. But do you feel like there were instances where you may have tried to figure it out, or did you mainly just live with what your circumstances were?
Yeah, I like this question. In terms of trying to figure it out or get it on my own, I think two things come to mind. One is selling candy, right? Like that was a thing. People, if they couldn't afford to go on trips or they couldn't afford to, buy the uniform or whatever, like the school would sign them up with a box of candy and sell it. But I wasn't that guy. Like I did not like selling candy. And more times than not, if I was given candy, we'd probably eat it and then have to like reimburse for what it is that we ate.
Yeah.
So so that wasn't an avenue that I like to pursue. When I think about when I first started working, and having my own money to be able to, buy my own things, it's funny because it's like this weird cycle that you see repeat into adulthood, right? We were making so little, or I was making so little that most of the money that I would make would be used towards transportation to get to and from work and food while I was at work. So I worked in like a mall. So I would go to the food court and I would spend money on food every lunch or maybe before I got to work or after I came from work and then jump on the bus, which cost money, and come home. And so, what it was that I was saving or that I was able to actually accumulate to buy myself nice things wasn't anything significant. And I was still in school at the time. So, I mean, maybe it was like small incidentals here and there where I didn't have to ask my mom, oh, can I have $1 to use the vending machine or something like that. But in terms of being able to like buy clothes or at least focusing my energy on, buying material things like that, like at that point I had already convinced myself like I have what I need. I mean, I won't say that there's never an instance where I went and bought, some t-shirts or some jeans or, some basics, but certainly it wasn't like I was trying to buy name brand.
Yeah. Sounds like you were pretty content, or maybe not content, but just okay with what you were experiencing at the time, which is similar to how I was experiencing. Other people have had just longings to be part of a crowd that they just maybe couldn't afford to be in, but still kind of forced their way in. You wouldn't say that was something that you tried to do or experience, would you?
Yeah, no, I was like the opposite of that. I chose to kind of reject the notion that material things gave me any sort of value. Um I would watch the people who had nice things from afar. Certainly you can notice that they have nice things, right? And you can notice the attention that comes with that. But as far as did I want to be that person? No, not like I think the word that you use, content, is appropriate. I made myself content with what I had, um, because that's just not where my values were aligned in that particular moment. And like I said, I think that early memory really is what kind of solidified that for me. It was just kind of like, all right, I'm not going to be disappointed because I'm not going to want it. And so when I was approached with questions around, these what if scenarios, right? Like, what if you won the lottery tomorrow and, you became a millionaire? What would you buy? It was really hard for me to conceptualize that because I'm like, well, the reality is that that's not happening. So why am I going to spend time, wasting brain power on trying to figure out what that looks like?
Yeah. Where do you think that even came from? Like if all around you, maybe not all around you, but around you, people were buying the nice things, being flashy, but you were different. Do you feel like you're just someone who just is born that way, or maybe you saw an example of someone?
Yeah, I think that the values instilled in me as a child influenced whether or not I wanted to pursue like that level of flamboyance or flash, if you will. Um, it wasn't something that I saw in my immediate family in terms of, we gotta have the nicest, newest this or whatever. Like there was a lot of secondhand experiences or a lot of secondhand items. I'll share this embarrassing kind of occurrence. There would be times where my dad, so when my mom, my dad, and my siblings and I all lived in the same house, or same apartment rather. There were times when my dad would come in and he was like, "There's a nice like piece of furniture on the corner," and so we would all have to like get up and go maybe late at night and drag the nice piece of furniture into our apartment. And I remember feeling embarrassed about it because I'm like, we're like dumpster diving, like people got rid of it, and so it was like free, but it was just kind of like, this is new. It's new to us, but it's not new, right? Like, and and there was kind of like no shame around that from my dad. It was just kind of like, all right, this is a nice thing, and no, this person doesn't want it, or these people don't want it, so we're gonna take it, we're gonna clean it up, and we're gonna bring it into the house. And I was like, I don't want to be this person. Like, and I certainly don't want to be outside caught by somebody who knows me or recognizes me taking these items back into the house when they were very clearly sitting, outside on the corner. Um, but like I said, that was a reality for a little while. And in that, I think I internalized like it's not so much the material things that make us that give us value. It's more so like the experiences and what can we do with family? How can we make I don't want to sound cliche, but like how can we make a house a home, so to speak, right? Like how can we fill our house with items or memories or things that allow for us to kind of appreciate each other's time together. And so there were pieces of furniture that it's like, oh, this makes the house more comfortable. So, now we can invite people over and we can have them sit or, different things like that. And like I said, I am the oldest of my siblings. So I think there's a level of responsibility that I internalized in that role that didn't allow for me to feel comfortable to just kind of splurge or be very impulsive with my money because I felt like all the decisions that I made, I was constantly being watched, whether that was from the, authority figures in my life, parents, grandparents, whoever, or the younger people in my life who were looking up to me and the behaviors that I demonstrated.
Do you remember having any money discussions with your parents or the elders in your family?
Yeah. The probably biggest piece of advice that was given from my parents and other elders was to save. And it's frustrating, I think, as a kid to hear that when we're not taught what we're supposed to be saving for. Or what is the reason why we're saving? So we become really good at this concept of taking some money or all of your money and putting it away. But then I think the lesson that needs to follow is what are you going to use that money for? Or what should you use that money for? How do you use that money responsibly? So, I mean, we would hear the things that I think most kids would hear, like, oh, as soon as you get that money, it's burning a hole in your pocket. Like you gotta put it away. You gotta save it. Um, my grandfather even got very like formulaic in terms of how much we should put away. He would say, you would take a third and spend it on whatever you want. Take a third and invest it. Take a third and save it. But again, I didn't understand, well, what does that mean to invest it? You're talking about investing in companies as a kid, like what company am I investing in? And taking the third and saving it. Well, saving it for what? Say, PlayStation 2 costs $250 and I'm getting $5 every birthday or $10 every birthday. Like for me, that was saving for a goal. But then what happens when you reach that goal and then you spend all the money that you saved and now you're back to zero? So I think it's important that that lesson was shared, but I think that there wasn't enough nuance or context around what the purpose of saving was for it to be something that really kind of carried me in my financial journey.
Yeah. So when you started making money, like at your first job, I think you mentioned was at the mall.
Yeah.
How did that experience go? Like you're starting making money on your own. It sounds like you're pretty grounded, so I don't think you kind of went all out and started shopping for things you felt you were missing on. But like what was that experience? You started making your own money and
Yeah. So I started working at the mall, started making my own money, and I had spent it mostly on like necessities, right? So the store that I worked at was Sears. I was a cashier. So of course there was a dress code. So I needed to make sure that I had enough of the clothing items that matched the dress code for me to continue to go to work. Or wash the clothes, which costs money because we didn't have a wash and dryer machine. Transportation. So I'm getting on the bus. Bus ride was probably, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour, one way. So, you're thinking about the time value of money there. Um, Food. So if we're out, you're maybe you get a 15, 20, 30 minute break, and you go to the food court, you try to buy something fast. So but mall food is expensive, so you're spending your money on that every day. Um so I think, a majority of the money that I was making, I was spending on being able to go into that work cycle, which ironically is kind of what we experience as adults, right? It was an introduction to what you experience as adults. Instead of paying for the bus, now I'm paying for gas, right? Instead of buying those uniform clothes, you're buying these uniform clothes. Instead of making food at home, you're going out and you're buying Chick-fil-A or McDonald's or whatever, Starbucks on your way into work. So those habits, the socialization of money, I think is really interesting when you first start working as a teenager, because you start to fall into those patterns and routines, and then they're reinforced as you get deeper into your own working experience. Certainly as an adult, like your whole existence hopefully is not going to and from work, and what you spend while you're there, um, because you're making more. But at that particular point in time, I think that I just felt like an adult. I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm making my own money. I'm responsible for getting to and from work, so I gotta spend this money. On transportation, I'm responsible for how I show up at work, so I gotta spend this money on clothes. Oh, the place that I work at gives me a discount. Okay, I'm gonna use that discount responsibly so that I can facilitate, buying a black tie, or whatever it is. And so I think more of the experience was on just kind of feeling accomplished as an adult and making my own money, even if there wasn't much left over, than on the fact that I was making money specifically.
Yeah, okay. My second job was at Sears. My first job was at a amusement park in my town, but that's so interesting because I always wanted to grow up in the city. I'm from New York as well, but I'm from Long Island, and my commute and just I don't think all of my money was eaten up by my life. I was able to save a little bit. So although we like are similar in some things, I remembered it wasn't much. Obviously, we weren't making much at Sears. But I just remember my goal at that time was to save because I knew I was going to college. So just save for college. So getting into that a little bit, like after you graduate from high school, did you go to college yourself?
I did.
Okay. What was like your young adult, early adulthood like with regards to money and just freedom in general?
Yeah. So freshman year of college, I went to St. Peter's. It was called St. Peter's College at the time, and St. Peter's University now, in Jersey City. And my parents did not have a car, so getting out there was an ordeal. And then determining whether, because I lived on campus, determining whether or not I would come home during weekends, only, or rather weekends, holidays only, or just waiting till the end of the semester was kind of a challenge, because in order for me to get home, I think at minimum I had to take like 3 trains, maybe more. And it was a long commute, like easily 2 hours or more. Um, and so sometimes it wasn't worth it financially. Most times, I mean, if I'm gonna be honest, I don't think it was worth it financially, but it was just like I don't want to be out here by myself. Um, my student loans covered my student loans and the grants that I received through scholarships and through the school covered my tuition, my room and board, and had like maybe a surplus of like $260 at the end of it all. So I had to wait, like refund check day was super exciting for everybody. I had to wait until I got that. I opened up my not my first bank account, but my second bank account out there. There was a Chase representative came onto campus and was signing people up. and Chase was the only, or I want to say the only, but it was a local bank. It was a bank that I could go into. So I like established my first like big boy account there. I had like a small savings account with a smaller bank from back home, but they didn't exist, and like there was no footprint over there. And I just remember like the thing that I remember the most about my freshman year of college was being hungry. I just remember like we had the meal plan where I could go into the cafeteria, but the cafeteria was open between, X hours and X hours. And so if you showed up and you ate, great. If you didn't show up and you didn't eat, well, that's it for you. Um, and on weekends the hours were less. And I think on some holidays, they were just not even open at all. There was like a school like store kind of market, and as a part of the meal plan, you had a certain amount of like university cash, but that went very quickly because everything in the market was super expensive. And all of my friends, or most of my friends anyway, they had parents that were sending them money so they could go out and they could buy these things, or they could go to, the Chinese restaurant or the mall or whatever. And I didn't have that. So I would go into some of my friends' rooms and I would see their dorms be completely decked out with all this nice furniture and electronics, and they would have the mini fridge, and the mini fridge would be packed with all of these different snacks, and really relied on the mercy of some of those friends in kind of sharing their snacks with me because I didn't have anything. And it's funny, I started experiencing heartburn at that age, probably because I was drinking underage. But I started experiencing like this crazy heartburn. And I remember one night I was sitting in the bed and I was like, what is this feeling? I'm like dying right now. And the school store was open, but I didn't have any money to go and get any like Tums. So I'm just sitting there like letting this heartburn like take over me. And I'm like, I need to do something. I need to drink some water. And I run into like the bathroom, or maybe there was a water fountain or something. I just remember drinking like the tap water to try to like satisfy this burn. Um, but yeah, it was definitely an experience of going without, which I wasn't unfamiliar with based off of the way that kind of the latter part of my teenage years went. It was just kind of like, all right, like this is business as usual. Like you come here, you do what you got to do. Um, and then also I didn't have enough money to buy books, so like I remember, I think I told this story actually recently. I remember being kicked out of my English class one day because the teacher asked me a question that was in the textbook that I didn't have. And she's like, go to the library and make copies of the pages. And so I go to the library and I realize in order to make copies, I have to spend coins that I didn't have. So I'm going around asking people for coins. Finally, I get enough coins to make the copies. I make the copies. I come back to class, and the teacher completely moved on to like the next part of the lesson. And so I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I wasted that time in the library begging people for change to make these copies of this page that it's like we're not even going to come back to. I just remember feeling like very like demoralized, like kind of embarrassed if I'm gonna be honest. But also like I don't know the word that I want to use to really kind of describe that. I just felt very low in that moment because I was like, you're making this huge deal about me not being able to perform, like to participate in this lesson, and not realizing that I don't have the money to afford the book and I didn't have the money to afford the copies. And then I went out on this like wild goose chase to come back, and like this is not even something that is going to make a difference. So my first semester, I think I got like mostly C's, maybe a B, um, and definitely a D in one of my classes. And I was just kind of like, coming from a background where I'm used to like excelling A's and B's, I was like, well, I did pretty good without having any textbooks. Like I'm hanging in there, like I'm still passing. And yeah, that was a tough experience for me.
That is so sad. Like to me, I don't know. I feel like I'm a little more empathetic than people. But you would think that you'd have a little more mercy for kids. I had a couple of professors who sold a textbook and required that you purchase that textbook for class. And then to realize we barely use the textbook, like I don't have two nickels to rub together, and you're requiring me to buy this $300 textbook that we never used. So that's very frustrating. I know it's like a money game, but when you're playing with college kids, like that's a little low. Um,
Yeah. And I don't think that I mean, I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that she knew because I didn't tell her that I didn't have enough money to buy books because certainly I wasn't gonna share that in front of the entire class in this moment that I'm being chastised. But I definitely took it personal in that moment because I'm like, she didn't even like inquire as to why. She kind of made it seem like I just was unprepared and coming to class, which could be the reality that she deals with in the students that the many students that she saw. But in that moment, I'm like, damn, I'm being penalized for like being poor.
mhm. Yeah, it's so sad because at the end of the day, teachers and professionals, or professors, they're people too. But I don't know. For me, it's like you have to have a little more awareness of like the kids you're dealing with. Like not everyone's in the same situation, and just sit and think about it a little more. Why is this kid acting up? Why is this kid not unprepared? Like, I don't know. I think maybe it's because of what I do. That gives me that perspective. But thinking back to some teachers, it's like, oh, you could have done better in that instance or situation. But you moved on. Did you ever get a job in college? Did you find that was necessary, or did like life for you start after then?
Life for me started after then. So I did a full year at St. Peter's. And then on one of the breaks, on one of the breaks, I went home and my mom let me know that she was considering moving to Texas. So I'm like, okay, what does that mean for me? Well, she's like, well, basically, like, what do you want it to mean for you? Do you want to come with me? Do you want to, stay here? And so basically, she kind of like gave me and my siblings a choice. Like, do we want to stay with our dad in New York or do we want to go with her to Texas? She kind of like articulated the move as a new start. And so I was like, you know what? Like, I'm gonna take it. And it was one of the scariest decisions at that particular point in time in my life that I had ever made. Because I was leaving everything and everybody that I knew behind. But I was like, I'm gonna go with my mom. And so I had withdrew from St. Peter's. I had started going to a community college that was local, and I went in person for that. So it was my first year, and then the first semester after my first year. So first semester of my sophomore year, and then we moved to Texas. I transitioned all of my classes to online, and then we moved in the fall of 2010. And so while I was out there, I was having a really hard time keeping up with classes because I'd never been in a fully remote environment before. And I started like missing assignments or getting them in late. And so, wasn't performing well at all. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to transfer my credits now to UTSA because we live in San Antonio. And just as I was getting ready to kind of, because that's a convoluted process, just as I was getting ready to start transferring my credits, my mom lets me know that her now fiance, the father of my brother, had got a job in Connecticut. And so we were all gonna move up back north to Connecticut. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So drop everything that I'm doing, which wasn't much, but drop everything that I'm doing there. We move up to Connecticut. And the first thing I'm thinking is like, I need money. Like, I need to get a job. So I started working for a supermarket, which I hated. I applied to work at a bank as a part-time teller, and I had got it. And it was the most money that I ever made at at any point in time in my life. I think it was like they offered me $11.35 or something like that, or maybe 11.15, I don't know, per hour. And I'm like, hell yeah, I'll take it. Like, let's do it. And that's when life started for me. I did 5 months as a part-time teller before I got my first promotion. I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to get a promotion. Okay, I like this. I did 6 months in my next role before I got another promotion. And I just kind of became a rising star within the organization. And so at that particular point in time, not only am I making more money than I've ever made before, but I'm learning about bank products and services, which also kind of spills over into understanding financial literacy. And I'm having conversations with all of these different people from different backgrounds on like the wealth spectrum. And I worked in what was referred to as a mass affluent market. So most of the clients that we had interfaced with were, these professionals who, were making good money, lawyers, doctors, accountants, entrepreneurs. And we would have to have conversations with them about, well, what are you doing with your home equity? Do you own a home? Do you have any investments? What do your savings look like? And so as I'm learning to ask these questions, I'm like, well, hold on a second. Like, what is a home equity? What is a retirement account? Like, what does investments look like? Oh, you have a business account? What kind of business do you have? How do you structure that? And so as I'm learning all of these things, I'm like, man, I need to like learn these things for me. I need to apply these things to myself. And so school kind of got the back burner for focusing on work and money. I did continue to go to school kind of part time until I think it was 2017. I graduated with my associate's degree, and then I was like, all right, I'm good. Like I'm not going to keep up with the school. Like I'm making more money than some of my friends who have bachelor's degrees right now. I'm in a good place. Like all of the attention is on me. Like I'm a rock star in the company. I'm a rock star in the industry. I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing, and that is kind of like how I got stuck in the banking world for 10 years. And in May of 2021, I said, I think I'm ready to do something else. And so I left.
So what were the things that you were learning? Like, are you saying that your career really started, like you are such a big name in like FinCon space and like financial therapy world, like that literally just started for you, or were you kind of building up to this?
Well, yes. Yes, it literally just kind of just started for me. So I think this is me speculating, right? Like I've been complimented on my level of self-awareness, but I think there's only so much self-awareness you can have when it comes to like where you've arrived to, particularly within the communities that you mentioned, right? FinCon community, Plutus community, financial therapy, financial counseling. Like, um, sometimes I talk to people and they're like amazed by me, and I'm like, oh, what did I do? Like, I did what I wanted. But if being technical about it, so I spent a decade in the banking industry. That's a long time. And in that time, that's where I started to learn about not only the financial products and services, but the mindset needed to be successful financially. And I think the reason why that's a big deal is because when my mindset started to shift and I would bring back this information and my experiences to my community, that I would see shifts in other people's mindsets and other people's behaviors. And I was doing it really like organically. It wasn't like I was trying to monetize it at all. Monetization wasn't even a word in my vocabulary at that particular point in time. Um, and then one day I decided that I wanted to write a book. So I wrote my first book, had nothing to do with finance, but people were like, "Oh, the money guy wrote a book." So people are buying the book because they're looking for financial information. And they're like, "Where's the stuff about the money?" And I'm like, "I'm not talking about money in this book. I'm talking about mentorship." That is something that I'm passionate about. And then I wrote my second book the year after, which was about money, called Financially Irresponsible. And as I was writing that book, I was preparing to deliver a TEDx talk. So the timing on the publishing for the book compared to the TEDx talk was literally like a day apart. I published the book and then I did the TED talk. And so it was like a 1-2 punch. I had released a press release through some of the Black news wires. And then Black Enterprise picked up the story about how I grew up experiencing poverty with the Section 8 and the food stamps. And I ended up buying my own home and I did the TEDx talk and the book. It was just like the perfect storm. And I just kept making noise. Going into 2020, I think I started writing for the Griot about personal finance. That's how I started to kind of like build my brand around there. And I was constantly looking for ways to, plug back to financially irresponsible. And then I discovered the personal finance community um that was not necessarily attached to FinCon, but maybe peripherally, some people knew about it. I started making friends in the space, going on like this massive podcast tour. Um, just like any I was like, anybody who has a podcast who wants to hear my story, I'm down. And they're like, "Oh, you got a book, you did a TED talk, you bought a multifamily home, like I want to hear about it." And so one podcast led to another, and it became a thing. And I started creating content on social media, Instagram primarily, but moved into Twitter, moved into Facebook, and all like LinkedIn, everywhere else. But at the time, I was still working. And I think things really kind of like blew up for me in 2021 when I quit my job because it was during the Great Resignation. It was a really bold move. I had done all of these other things, the 2 books, the TEDx talk, the writing for publications, speaking. And so I think in maybe it was between February and May, um, I found out that I was a speaker at FinCon 21, and I had like broadcasted it on my social medias and LinkedIn in particular. And my manager at the time was like, "What is this about? Why are you doing this? What is your intentions with this?" And I had just got my certified financial education instructor designation in February of 21. And so she felt like I was trying to make a move, which I wasn't. I was perfectly content to stay where I was at. I just wanted to do what I was doing or like be left alone. And I knew that I was going to come to a decision where I had to make either I'm going to commit to doing this work at the bank or I'm going to go do my own thing. And I was like, I'm too big to hide this now, right? Like I was writing for Entrepreneur. So I was writing for Entrepreneur, I was writing for the Griot, I was invited to speak at FinCon, I had the TEDx talk, I had the 2 books. Like I'm like, I can't hide this. So I made the decision to leave and I did it in a very like non-conventional way. I was like effective immediately. I'm out, like I quit. And I tweeted that and the tweet goes viral, which I didn't expect. And so many people are congratulating me and reaching out and like celebrating this, like, "Oh, this was so brave of you and so courageous." And next thing I know, Business Insider is running the story, Entrepreneur ran the story, the Griot ran the story. Bigger Pockets Money reached out to me and was like, "Do you want to talk about this on our podcast?" Um, Tamron Hall, producer from Tamron Hall show, reached out to me and was like, "Do you want to talk about this on our show?" And I'm like, "This is not real. Like, there's no way." And that's how a lot of people kind of like found out about me. And I was like, "All right, I'm gonna continue to plug the stuff that I have." Like, um, during 2020, when the whole George Floyd murder occurred, Robert Kiyosaki went on Twitter and made some, comments about the protesters, and I wrote an open letter to him through the griot, and that went viral. So a bunch of people found me through that, and I've been building community ever since. So I think that's how like I started to get known, and I have a way about talking about my experience with money as a Black man, as a millennial, that acknowledges the experience of Black people from the time of slavery in this country. And that's how I kind of stumbled onto the financial trauma term. And I started using that probably towards maybe the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. And in 2022, I went to FinCon in person because 21 I did virtually. And then the month after that, I went to Financial Therapy Association's conference in person. And then the month after that, I went to the AFCPE's conference in person. And so, of course, I'm meeting all of these people and I'm talking about the stuff that I talk about. And they're like, "You're on to something." And I stayed on the thing that people really liked. So my message transitioned from this idea of, just financial empowerment into financial trauma, and acknowledging that, well, financial trauma stops you from feeling financially empowered. So let's deal with the financial trauma. And let's talk about it from a lens that is not just you have to work harder, you have to learn more, you have to, it's your fault. And talk about it from a systemic, structural perspective. And I didn't have vocabulary to describe the things that I talk about now, right? Like now I understand systems theory, but I didn't know, I knew what systems theory was because of my lived experience and the education that I had, but I didn't know that it was called systems theory, right? I didn't know how to describe financial trauma until I started using the phrase, and I got involved with the Financial Therapy Association, these other organizations. So it seems like it happened overnight, but it's been kind of like this very long, like cumulative learning experience that has transitioned from my lived experience and my ability to articulate that lived experience without the vocabulary that I have now, into being able to support those experiences with the sophistication of vocabulary and community that has come with getting involved with these different organizations and really having my voice amplified.
So you mentioned even before you were in these spaces, you were already writing for different publications and things. Like, how did that all come about for the professional? So I've met several people who were kind of new to FinCon this past year, um, who are still trying to figure it out. So what would you say to them? How did you kind of get into it? Because you were already doing this before you even came into the various spaces and communities. So how did that all come about?
Yeah. I've always been a writer. I haven't always liked writing though. So that's I think an interesting kind of tidbit. But I read a book. I read two books actually at the beginning of like my content creation journey. It was Crushing It by Gary Vee, and basically talks about like the different ways to create content and repurpose your content, be authentic and all that. And a book called Platform by Cynthia Johnson. And in the book Platform, Cynthia Johnson talks about how to really create a personal brand. Both Gary Vee and Cynthia Johnson talk about it, the importance of creating a personal brand. But Cynthia Johnson really kind of talks about like how do you establish yourself as an authority or an expert. And one of the things that she talked about was writing. And so I was like, wait a second, like I could write for like a Business Insider or an entrepreneur. And I went started looking how to, reverse engineer this process. I took a couple of courses, joined a couple of masterminds. Like I mean, I definitely invested in the education, understanding like how do you pitch a publication, who do you pitch, when you structure your pitch, how do you demonstrate expertise in this particular area, right? You don't want to be pitching for every different topic just because. And so the area that I could, with the most authority, speak to was personal finance, right? I could speak to 10 years, or not at the time it wasn't 10 yet, but almost 10 years of presence in the space. I could speak to, having a book about personal finance. I could speak to having the TEDx talk on personal finance. So like those were like my big pieces of credibility. And then once I got my first piece out, it was like, all right, like now you just ladder it, right? Like do another piece and another piece and another piece. And so I've written for anybody that you would want to write for. Business Insider, The Griot, Black Enterprise, Money.com, Entrepreneur, Forbes. That's my baby right now, right? Like when I first started writing, I said I want to write for Forbes. Like that's the goal. And it took me a couple of years to get there, but it took all of those small steps or checking off those boxes to position myself to be able to approach Forbes and have them say yes. Because I've approached them before and they said no. I approached them a couple of times and they said no. So um looking back on the journey, it I think my advice would be to get started. Like don't it's important to know what you want your end goal to be, but it's also important to not get so fixated on the end goal that you forget to do the small things that it takes for you to move in that direction. Like me buying the course, participating in the masterminds, reading those books, like those help me conceptualize the goal, but then actually putting in the reps, writing for myself, um, writing on Medium. I mean, I have my own newsletter even to this day, writing on Substack, writing on social media, like developing the skill as a writer is something that I've had to do over time. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm gonna wake up one day and I'm gonna write for Forbes. Because even when you get to a place where you can write for these publications, they're gonna want to see that you can actually write. And I think a lot of people, especially in the age of Chat GPT, want to outsource some of these skill sets so that they can just say that they have the name, right? Forbes, entrepreneur, whoever. But I'll use Chat GPT, but I won't use Chat GPT to write my articles. You're not allowed to, but even if you were allowed to, like there's a certain level of pride that I take with how I can articulate myself through writing that wouldn't allow for me to do that. And so I think the question that people need to ask themselves when they are thinking about embarking on kind of a similar journey is like, why do you want to do this? Or do you actually want to do this? Or is it just because you want to be associated with the name? And all of my media mentions have been organic. I've never paid for media.
That's good. I mean, what you just said is really true. Like you have to be true to yourself in what it is that you want to do, the impact that you want to make. Because for me, writing was being pushed at a time, and I also am not really strong at writing. So eventually, I was just like, to heck with it. So I never really wanted to pick it up, but if you want to, I definitely encourage people to pursue that. And why do you remember why Cynthia said writing was a way for you to make a name for yourself?
Um, I think it's because I'm trying to remember the book. I mean, it was years ago when I read it. I think it's because you're reaching a larger audience. I mean, this is of course in the beginning stages of social media taking off. You're reaching a larger audience in an authority platform, right? Like if I'm saying this on Forbes, people are like, oh shoot, like Rahkim's in Forbes saying this is different than if I, you know, wrote it on a blog that maybe somebody saw, maybe they didn't. So it's the association with the name certainly that matters. But also she talked about leveraging the writing for these authority sites into speaking opportunities as well. So when you are writing for a Forbes or Business Insider or an entrepreneur, people view you as an expert. They view you as the expert on whatever it is that you're writing about. And so they will seek you out to come speak, or maybe not as much now. I've had some people reach out to me and they're like, hey, we want to pay you to come talk about, what you talk about in your articles. But it's not been like, oh my God, my life has changed because the right person read my article. Um, but it is a thing that happens. Podcast is a thing now. Platform came out a while ago, so podcast wasn't as popular as it is now. But I've had a lot of people reach out to me to be on their podcast because of it. It's just, I think the authority that comes with these publications is what the draw is to really kind of establishing yourself as a thought leader on whatever the topic is. And then when those decision makers, because you got to think about who's the audience, right? Who's reading Forbes? Who's reading Entrepreneur? Where are they in terms of their career trajectory? Where are they in terms of their decision making power? Where are they in terms of their income? This is going to sound terrible, but you're not having high school graduates go and read Forbes. Like that's not who Forbes is catering their content to. They're catering their content to, mid-level or C-suite level executives, entrepreneurs, people with bachelor's and master's level degrees, people who are making, significant income. And so, in talking to those audiences, you I would not get in front of that population any other way.
Yeah. Um, Thank you. I know we're a little over time. Do you have time for one or two more questions?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, and also that is like evergreen content when it comes to like your legacy and leaving your mark in this world. Like writing is one of the best ways, if not the best way to do that. So you definitely suggest people look into writing, is what I'm gathering.
Um, I had a conversation with a friend recently, and they asked me, they're a speaker. They're a speaker writer. I'm a writer speaker. And this is the realization I had in the conversation. I'm really interested in understanding your writing process because for me, it starts with speaking. I will record myself saying what it is that I want to discuss during the writing, and then I would transcribe it. And I said, that's interesting because my process for speaking is exactly the opposite. I will write down what it is that I want to say in a speaking environment, and then I will transition it into a more kind of organic feeling speaking. So they go hand in hand. I can speak and write, but I just know that my strength leans more towards writing than it does towards speaking. I'm an introvert as well. So when it comes to the energy exchange that occurs as a speaker versus as a writer, all I got to do is write it and then put it out into the world. People keep reading it. It's not taking any more energy from me. Versus when I speak, particularly if I'm speaking with a large audience, you're interacting with all of those energies at once, and then people want to approach you afterwards and they want to talk to you, and I love all of that, but I'm just conscious of how it impacts my energy in that moment, and in the moments to follow. So I think determining what is the way in which the content serves you best is important. Certainly there are ways to build authority through speaking, um, that maybe are just as effective as writing. It's just, for me, writing has been like my thing. And so I've leveraged that to allow for me to speak and to allow for me to consult and show up in the different ways that I show up. But that has been really like my baseline.
So ultimately, it's what's best for you, as long as you're putting yourself out there, sharing your story. As Brene Brown would say, don't let your testimony go to waste. So just
Definitely.
doing your part.
Definitely.
Um, what would you say are some of the money scripts or things or thoughts you've had about money? What would you say are some that you had to overcome or some that you're still dealing with nowadays?
Yeah, so I thought that money avoidance was the money script that I subscribe to this day. Because when you look at the journal that Dr. Brad Klontz and company published around the different money scripts, statistically, my upbringing would land me in the money avoidance script. And for a long time, I was money avoidant. I think we spent a good time talking about that today. But recently I took a quiz. I have to find the resource where you can take a quiz, and basically ask you a series of questions around money and how you interact with money, what you believe about it, etc. And the script that came back with the highest score for me today was money worship, which I thought was really interesting. And so money worship is kind of like the idea that if I had more money in my life, that all my problems would be solved. And so it'll ask you questions like, just like that, like, if you have more money, would your problems go away? Um, I forget all of them, so I would just be burning time trying to remember. But it's very interesting to me because I was like, I've never been the guy to place so much value on money, on material things. What I realized though is that there are a couple of things that influence that outcome. One is that as a full-time entrepreneur with fluctuating income, that more money in my life would solve all my problems. So my answers are not like wrong. It's reflective of what it is that I'm experiencing right now. And then also, because I've graduated from the scarcity associated with money avoidance, now I'm in a place where I'm allowing myself to um, align my values with spending more, right? Having better experiences, flying first class, going to different places, wanting the more expensive clothing item or accessory, right? Looking at things like Rolexes and, not from a position of, I think it's very easy to kind of confuse money worship with money status, not from a position of, I have this thing and so it makes me better than somebody else, but from a position of, for so long I told myself I couldn't have this, and now I want it. Like I want all of it. So I don't think that any of the money scripts in and of themselves are bad. I think that it lets you know where you kind of are fixating on money so that you can be self-aware and make adjustments as needed. Um, because, certainly if money status was the script that I'm most closely aligned to, then that would be even more surprising. Hold on a second, like, what does this mean? But money status could speak to comfort, right? I could say, oh, well, instead of driving a Nissan, I want to drive a Lexus, right? Like, there is a quality that comes with this luxury vehicle that doesn't come with the other one. It looks like on the outside that I want this because of other people, to prove to other people that I've arrived, and maybe that might be the case. But doesn't make me a bad person necessarily. So yeah, that's what's interesting around where I land in terms of my money script today. Definitely money worship.
Yeah. I mean, I think I read that the difference between the two is money worship is more internal and money status is like what you want other people to think about you.
Yes.
But what you shared about like where you are in life and what your financial status is will, of course, affect your money scripts. And so if you have fluctuating income and just that instability, yes, you will think like, man, if I had a little bit more or had more
Right.
stability. And it's so funny. I just really kind of discovered the script and created some type of test to share. I know the test is available for practitioners to share with their clients, but I just used like this spreadsheet and I didn't even think to do it for myself. Like I've shared it with some of my friends and I didn't even think to do it, but I would love to know what mine are. I will keep you posted on what those are.
Please do.
So, so um, last question. What would you say to the person experiencing their own financial journey or going through their own journey right now? Like, what is the number one piece of advice you'd share for them to help them along their journey? Not necessarily to make the right decisions, because the right decision is whatever is right for them, but to navigate it in the best way that they can.
Yeah. I say this often, but I mean it. I mean it with all my heart. Like, as much as it's about the money, it's not. Um, Self-awareness is important. Normalizing wealth is important. And so, by extension, I think mentorship is important. Just being exposed to people who have and do and think differently is going to have a huge impact on what you can even see as being feasible. Um, I had a mentor that I acquired this year who has completely like changed the way that I view money. And I'm like, man, like, I'm an expert on this topic. And even being an expert on this topic, like, there's things that I just didn't consider, right? Like, even um what I had shared with you earlier on around recognizing the limiting beliefs that I have around money came about as a result of a conversation that we had. So and also I would say, like, most of the stuff that we see online is just not real. Like, I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of comparing where you are in your financial journey with some, whoever, Joe Schmo online or Rahkim Sabree online, right? And saying like, man, like, I want to do what Rahkim did. And not realizing all of the variables that went into the decisions that I've made. I'm just using myself as an example, but all the variables that went into the decisions that I've made over the course of, my financial life, or really my whole life, right? Deciding to go to college and then get out to go move to Texas, right? Like, deciding to go as far as my associate's degree and then stop so that I could keep making money at the bank, deciding to quit my job at the bank so that I could pursue entrepreneurship. Like, there are so many variables behind the scenes that, yes, people can applaud me for the courage that I've had in those moments, and for the transparency and sharing those moments, but there's so much more than people see. And I would not want somebody to follow those footsteps without um understanding that. I wouldn't want somebody to follow those footsteps, even if they did understand that. If I'm gonna be 100% real, just because a lot of that came with sacrifice. A lot of that came with fear, overcoming fear. A lot of that came with the support system that I have or don't have. Um, Came from the money scripts and stories that I've witnessed, observed, picked up, collected, integrated into my own life. So um, there's a lot of success on, this side of Rakim's experience. There's a lot that has come with what that success has looked like. And so I think the most important thing for me to share is, that level of transparency, right? Like your journey is your journey, and the decisions that you make are going to be the right decisions for you. And nobody else can guide those decisions. Nobody else can make those decisions for you. People can give you guidance, but you have to ultimately walk through the door.
Yeah. So we're on the same page. At the end of the day, like the cards that you're dealt, the experiences you've had, that cannot lead you to become Rakim or any other big name in finance or whatever it is you do. At the end of the day, your experiences will lead to the legacy that you're here to live and lead. So I think the role of the person who has maybe um, come out and has like a bigger name for themselves is to be an inspiration rather than something that people should copy. So doing what you're doing is inspiring a lot of people. And so thank you so much. How can people connect with you, follow your journey, reach out to you? What are the best ways?
Yeah, all of my social media is my name, at Rahkim Sabree. No hyphens, underscores, periods, spaces.
How do you spell Rahkim Sabree?
RahkimSabree. My website is rahkimsabree.com. You can find me there. My Substack is rahkimsabree.substack.com. So I send out a pretty weekly, sometimes I take breaks, but pretty weekly newsletter on Substack. And then Forbes, you can find me, just type my name into Forbes, Rahkim Sabree, and then my author page will come up and all the articles that I wrote. Um, so yeah, everywhere at Rahkim Sabree.
All right. Thank you so much, Rakim, for sharing your story with us. I'm sure someone or everyone who listens will get something out of it. So thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.